The Empire of Khador. Countless victories are behind us, yet we are not half done. We fight to restore a legacy once denied us. Our enemies tremble before our invincible armies, and all will kneel or perish. The Kadorian Empire is gone, but the Kadorian Empire is born. Empress Anion, Venar. For the motherland. As unrelenting as their homeland of thick woodlands, towering mountains, and endless winters are, the Kadorians are known for their steely resolve in the face of hardship. These descendants of the ancient Kadorian Empire have never forgotten the days of glory, a time before the yoke of Orgoth dominion and the concession of the Corvus treaties. It is that golden era that Empress Anion Venar and her people hold to their hearts and seek to reestablish across western Immoran. The massive armies of Khador personify the ideals of its people, prizing strength and resistance above all else. Equally inclined to bravery or stubborn tenacity, they are willing to outlast their enemies in a war of attrition that if they cannot smash them asunder. Their forces are glorious to behold as they march along with crimson standards, whipping above and titanic warjacks, shaking the very earth with each step. With bold actions and bold attacks, Khador has recently brought Lael and the Thornwood under the banner of the motherland, but mastering these new lands is proving as difficult as conquering them. The armies of Khador must remain vigilant, determined to hold all that they have gained, and ready to strike at the heart of their enemies for glory, nation, and Empress. The military of the Kadorian Empire. Loyalty, strength, and conquest. The Kadorian Empire is the inheritor of an ancient legacy of proud warriors. Its people are rugged and hardy men and women, united and inspired by the ambition of their Empress. The enthusiasm for battle and the esteem afforded soldiers, combined with mandatory service, has enabled Khador to mobilize a substantial portion of its population into war. With ongoing efforts to modernize the military and optimize its industrial capacity, Khador stands as one of the great powers of Western Immoran. Victories in the last several years included the invasion and occupation of Lael, and pushing Signar defenders from the Thornwood has increased the fear and respect the Kadorian army inspires across Western Immoran. The Kadoran military has recently made tremendous strides in modernization through the development of long-range artillery and more advanced warjacks, as well as leveraging the military genius and organizational skills of singular leaders like Supreme Commandant Gulvald Irusk. The invasion of Lael proved to be a boon for the army by bringing many vital supplies and technological developments to Khador. Seizing and plundering the holdings of the Order of the Golden Crucible brought extensive alchemic stockpiles such as vital blasting powder and other useful weapons into the hands of the motherland's armies. The entirety of the Lycian industry is at their disposal as well, focused primarily on Ladre and the former capital Merywyn. By seizing such assets, Khador has deprived her longtime enemy Signar of their oldest ally, and inspired in many Kadorians the belief that nothing can stop their road to further conquest. Since that time, advances have unfortunately been more difficult and slow, but the fighting spirit of the soldiers remains undiminished. Many princes, one throne. The modernization of the Kadorian military required several large ideological shifts. While this is true to a degree for all modern military powers of the Iron Kingdoms, Khador has arguably surmounted the largest internal barriers and overcome the longest and most entrenched traditions. Signar, Ord, Lael, and later the Protectorate of Menoth have had the luxury of inventing themselves as new nations. But Kadorian laws and military doctrine were deeply rooted in the legacy of the ancient Kardic Empire. In recent years, Empress Anion Venar has brought singular unity to Khador, but this has not always been the case. Indeed, the almost universal support and acclaim Empress Venar has won is a notable departure from all but her most recent predecessors. Until the time of the Venars, Khador's military was largely stagnant, as the kingdom's rulers lacked the vision and the will to adapt to the changing needs of warfare. Before the Orgoth, in the centuries where the old Kardic Empire united the northern lands and tribes by sword, lance, and fire, these harsh lands were divided up into various territories called Voloskaya. The Voloskaya were once counted themselves as sovereign kingdoms by their own right and only reluctantly bowed to their Kardic conquerors. Even after the powerful lords governing these regions surrendered their authority, they clung to claims of special status and of royal blood. Once these rulers were called kings, but by the final years of the Kardic Empire, they were simply referred to as great princes, a title chosen to demonstrate their vassalage to the Kardic emperor or empress. This tradition was renewed after the Corvus treaties, when Khador was established as a new nation, with the great princes restored as the highest nobility but subordinate to the sovereign. After long centuries of Orgoth occupation, Khador's ruling elite, who rose to prominence alongside other Emeresian leaders of the rebellion, had to confront a legacy of cultural disruption and uncertainty. Commoner and noble alike were eager to embrace any symbol hearkening to the past glories of the Kardic Empire. Unfortunately, records detailing the governance of all the old empire were incomplete and in disarray. One area that remained muddled was the exact process by which the lineage of Kardic sovereigns had been verified and approved in the empire. Old law stated that the Kardic Empire's sovereign must be descended from the ruling families of the Voloskaya, but otherwise these stipulations were very vague. It was uncertain whether all those of the quote-unquote royal bloodlines were equally valid, or if more stringent requirements existed to limit the lineage to fewer, even if only one, of these esteemed families. There were those who insisted only original Kardic Voloskaya were qualified, not later subjugated tribes like the Umbrians, the Skiravs, and the Kassites. Also unknown is whether the great princes of a collective had any legal authority to endorse the coronation, this type of coronation. This uncertainty prompted innumerable feuds and decades of strife, starting almost immediately after the founding of Khador. The Umbrian great prince Vlaudin Zapeshis seized power and became the ruling monarch of Khador in 209 AR, just 7 years after the Corvus treaties. Scholars in his employ claim that the Zapeshis bloodline is the strongest and more closely connected to the last of the Kardic emperors, who were described as, quote, horse lords born of the soil of the eastern plains, unquote, and who preferred to rule from the eastern capital of Korska rather than from Korsk in the west. Other disputes of this interpretation of historical text and emphasized an earlier era where the Zapeshich had divided Umbre from the empire sparked the Horse Lord Wars. The opposition was unable to organize in sufficient strength to stand against Vlaudin, and the most vocal of dissident nobles were assassinated outright. The Zapeshich line clung tenaciously to rulership for over the next 60 years, passing the crown through 3 inheritors, but their rule remained closely contested. Decades under the rule of Vlaudin, Geza, and Lavash Zapeshich were torn by internal strife. Addendum: the Kadoran Navy. There is no question that the Kadoran Navy lacks the same esteem in the minds of both the nation's citizens and its rulers as enjoyed by the Kadorian army. Throughout its history, the Navy has been less prominent than the army, receiving sparse praise and generally been poorly funded. Nonetheless, the High Command is aware of the strength at sea possessed by its southern rival Signar and by the sometimes precocious neutral nation of Ord. Krix are also periodically threatened Kadoran shores, although until recently the Nightmare Empire seems to be content to raid closer to their own waters. Kadoran boasts several significant port cities, most notably Port Vladova, Skorovenberg, and Ork, and must preserve its waters and shipping trade. This is the role of its navy, whose single fleet has received a fresh infusion of support and funding. While the army remains the clear priority of the Empress and her Kayazi supporters, the navy of the motherland is stronger today than at any point in its history. Port Vladodorov is the home port of the Kadoran Navy, and the nation's pride was threatened in 606 AR when the vital city was the subject of an unexpected attack by Krixian vessels, including the elements of the Black Fleet and ghostly revenant-filled ships such as the notorious Atramators. Although the Krixian forces were nearly driven off, they inflicted such severe damage to both the city and the fleet. Fleet Admiral Pavel Naimarov took his own life shortly after this disgrace and was replaced by Jessic Dunkev, the current head of the Khador's Navy. Dunkev has managed to garner considerable support for the Navy in the wake of the Port Valadorv disaster, including funds to build a number of mighty iron hulls. The Navy hopes eventually to employ their maritime might for a coastal invasion against southern rivals, but is presently focused on defensive maneuvers to maintain the safety and integrity of their port cities and shipping lanes. Under Dunkev's bold leadership, the fleet has increasingly tested the resolve of both Auric and Signarin fleets by pushing further into the southern waters. This has led to occasional small-scale engagements when Dunkev considers an essential in preparing his officers for the more extensive battles he is certain will arise in the months ahead. End addendum. The greatest of these rulers was Lavesh Sepesich, who held Khador in his iron fist for over 30 years, from 236 to 272 AR. Called Lavesh the Tormentor, he hoped to unite Khador by instigating war with the southern nations. His plan was to crush the lesser armies of his neighbors quickly by employing the unyielding power of the newly built Kadorian colossals. Although his wars against Lael and Ord were initially successful, his plans for expansion faltered after Signar joined the war, bringing their own colossals. The Colossal War, as it was called, from 250 to 257 AR, were ultimately an expensive failure for Khador, which was left both humiliated and bankrupt in its defeat. The harsh terms in the end of this war forced Lavesh to agree to dismantle not only his towering colossals, but also the factories in Kursk that had produced them. This was a blow to Kadoran pride and military strength and left the nation at a disadvantage for several decades. Khador would not return to Sepesich's rule. Lavash had a reputation for tyranny and mistreated his highest vassals as well as the wider populace. His wars required punishing taxes and forced conscription. Whatever his actual failings, they were continually exaggerated by competing great princes who had hoped to destroy the Sepesich dynasty and state a new blood on the throne. By the end of Lavash's long reign, his family was universally despised. Lavash evaded many assassination attempts to die of old age, a fact his enemies insisted was evidence of sinister pacts. From this point forward, the Sepesic bloodline was linked to rumors of sorcery, dark cults, and unseen conspiracies, although its members remained popular romantic figures to the Umbrians in the east. Dmitry Dompevich ousted the Sepesic heirs in 272 AR and was the first to assume the title of king. King Dmitry took measures to institute more formal laws to define the monarchy in Khador as a distinction from, if connected to, the sovereignties of the old empire. Despite these efforts, after his reign, the families of other great princes, particularly those in the populous middle and southern territories continued to squabble over the succession claims. The names of the families controlling the Vodyskaya changed over time, but each insisted that they could trace their roots back to one or another of the old Kardic emperors. It was not until centuries later, after the horrors unleashed by the necromancer king Ivan Vladikin the Frenzied, that a stable dynasty took control of the Kadorian throne. After leading the forces that defeated the necromancer in a coup in 459 AR, Mikhail Venar reluctantly accepted the crown. Khador soon began to see significant advances and reforms, a process that culminated in the ascension of Queen Anion Venar into the throne. While the effectiveness of each Venar ruler after Mikhail is debatable, the common perception across Khador is that the Venars ushered in an era of success and prosperity to their nation. The Venar mystique was so pervasive and powerful that difficulties faced by the members of this dynasty have largely been forgotten. Indeed, the one interpretation of the Venar dynasty is considered proof of their divine right to rule. It was during the reign of the Mennonite king Ruslan Vigor from 499 to 511 that Signar defeated Khador during the First Thornwood War. This setback reinforced many Kadorians the ill-omened passing of the crown to a non-Venar sovereign. The most famous and widely adored of the Venars was King Ivad, who became known as the People's King when he abolished the serfdom in 546. It was he who popularized the notion that Khador would rise again as a great empire, inheriting the strength and honor of old. His granddaughter, Anion Venar, would be the one to eventually see this dream become a reality, building on the efforts set forth by her grandfather and later by Regent Simonov Blastivian, who held the throne until her majority. She cemented her popularity in 606 after successfully conquering Lael by crowning herself Empress of the Kadorian Empire. Regardless of the popularity of the Venar dynasty, the great princes of the Vodyskaya remained powerful Kadorian nobles, each wielding considerable influence in the capital. Their role in the government has changed over the centuries, but they still possess some special liberties and are treated as akin to lesser royalty. Among the rights the great princes maintain is the prerogative to gather liegemen and equip them for war. Many of them have voluntarily abandoned this privilege to consign their own vassals to the sovereign and the high command, encouraging them to serve as officers in the Kadoran army. Others have preserved their own martial traditions as matters of family pride. The Kadoran sovereignty has traditionally bestowed upon these great noble military honors and ranks befitting their station. A number of the great princes and their high vassals are currently commandants and commanders in the Kadoran army, even if most rarely participate directly in military actions. Several hold these ranks in name only and are allowed hand-picked subordinates to lead the soldiers under their command. Despite the general accord brought by these measures, the Empress is well aware that a sufficiently ambitious great prince could threaten the unity of the Kadoran people. Only those peerless nobles would be able to make a convincing claim for her throne. The Sepeshish line in particular has long been a rival of the Venars and never really fully trusted. The Umbran nobles have repeatedly proven their loyalty to the great Princess Sepeshish before their rightful sovereignty. There are many nobles in the capital who believe the Sepeshishes have never really abandoned the dream of sitting on the throne. Over the years, rival great princes and other political advisors urged both Regent Simonev Blastivian and Emperor Anion to strip the Sepeshiches of their authority and pass the Vodyskaya into other hands. Despite pressure, this dramatic measure was never approved. Such a degree could stir up popular support for the Sepeshish family in the East, where they retain considerable clout and are held in almost legendary esteem. The situation has been complicated in recent decades since the current Sepeshish prince Vladimir manifested warcaster talent and devoted his life to fighting alongside the Kadoran army, as well as providing invaluable mentoring to promising warcasters. Despite these apparent good works, the question of Sepesh's loyalty returned to the fore after the successful capture of Lael, which unified the lands once called Umbrae. Several eastern great princes have meanwhile allied beneath the Sepesh's banner, and awareness of a renewed Umbran sentiment has prompted considerable unease in Kursk. Closer to the war front, Vladimir Sepeshich has been earning quite a different reputation among those who have fought alongside him. They call him the Dark Champion, and know that he has performed acts of singular heroism and risked his life time and again against the enemies of Khador. They have seen him suffer to save their lives. Even his adversaries would not dare question his courage, although they may harbor doubts regarding his long-term goals. Alongside the sovereign and great princes, another force has arisen in recent decades to play a significant role in the nation's political schemes: the Kayazi. This class of wealthy commoners or merchant princes has a long history, but increasingly significant, but in both power and prominence after King Ivad abolished serfdom. This included any influential men and of wealth, those with legitimate business dealings, and those who control criminal enterprises, particularly those in Kursk. Their wealth has been essential to fund a number of vital industrial efforts valued by the crown and the army, and this in turn has given them much political power. The Kayazi resent the influence of the great princes and other nobles of Khador, and have worked to elevate their own positions while reducing that of individuals they see as relics of a bygone age. This class-based tension has only increased as the strain of war has been placed a considerable burden on the Kayazi, and they intend to reap the benefits. Empress Venar has proven quite adept at maneuvering both groups to her advantage, sometimes pitting one against the other. She has reason more than most to not really side with the Kayazi against the families, which, after all, might otherwise threaten her rule.